She's running a bit late with some family things. So, in her stead, I will call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. And see, we've got members of all community boards, and I believe we will have someone shortly from Councilman Borelli's office. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Michael is here.
That would be me.
That would be you. Sorry, my screens are rolling with all these faces coming. I feel like a Vegas dealer. In any case, let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If anyone has a flag, feel free to display. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Community Board 3 is always prepared.
Way to represent, yes. Jerry. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Charlene taught me well.
Brilliant. One quick thing of bookkeeping. If I could entertain a motion regarding the minutes from last month's meeting. Jerry to accept. And I'm sorry, who seconded?
Robert.
Super. Thank you so much, Robert. Very good. Next, we do have DOT with us. Thank you very much for this afternoon. You'll be presenting the master plan.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for inviting us. We really appreciate it. I'm not going to talk long. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. I see Rami's on the call, and I saw Karen Summer and Chris Horonis, some of the fantastic team that I bring with me from DOT, and they're going to give you a little bit of an overview of our master plan. And as I said, I'm going to turn it over to them. I want to thank you again for making the time for us today. This is really helpful to us in our road to sort of introduce this plan to our community. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Rami. Would you like to start?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
To just kick it over to Chris or Justin to do the presentation, but we're very happy to be able to present today, and we look forward to working with everyone here this year and going forward on this plan. Thanks so much.
Sorry, Chris Horonis to make the presenter.
Yes, I'll begin, and I will share my screen. See. Sorry, let's get this up.
Brooke, you may have to give him permission to share the screen.
He's the presenter.
It may just take a while. Hold on.
Okay. There you go.
There it goes. All right. Okay, sorry about that delay. We're very happy to be here today presenting what we're calling the New York City Streets Plan. That's our new brand, our new name, to Staten Island, and you guys are the first we're presenting to, so we're happy to do that. I am going to today start us off by giving a little bit of background and context to the project, where this came from, and what we do already, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Justin Romeo, who is the co-leader for this project, to talk about what our plan approach is very briefly, and then talk about a really important component, which is the public engagement that we have planned for this project. So some of you may know the genesis of this project dates back to 2019, when the City Council Speaker Johnson released a report that, among other things, called for the creation of a streets master plan. Later that year, Council passed a local law, 195, that mandated that DOT prepare such a plan. And that was, of course, signed into law by Mayor de Blasio. So what does this law call for? It requires DOT to issue a plan by the end of this year, and it would be a 5-year plan to be renewed every 5 years. The law highlights specific benchmarks, and we'll get into what that means, and requires that we implement those. And then there's an annual status report requirement, and that starts in 2023. And finally, there's a public education requirement that goes along with the plan after the plan's complete. So these benchmarks, which are really the highlight of the legislation, call for some very specific items for us to work on and be included in the plan and implemented. Includes bus lanes, which may be protected either with enforcement cameras or by physical barriers. It includes transit signal priority, which is essentially using signals to give buses more exclusive green time. It calls for bus stop upgrades, which could include things like benches, shelters, or real-time schedule information at the stops. Protected bike lanes are a part of it, and then also intersection safety upgrades. Also, accessible pedestrian signals, which essentially are audible signals that make things safe for the visually impaired. It also calls for us to create additional pedestrian space, for us to upgrade the pedestrian ramps, or essentially corner curb cuts, to make them ADA accessible. And finally, assessing and amending commercial loading zones and truck routes, and developing some parking policies to promote some of the goals that the city has. So it's important to note that all of these items are things, none of these are new programs per se. They're all things that DOT does already. So what's the significance? Well, the significance is that the law asks DOT to significantly ramp up the level of production of pretty much all of these items. And it's also important to understand that currently, and this part of this is coming out of COVID, but even before COVID, the ability for us to sort of implement all these things to the levels that the council is asking for will depend on additional resources. And that's not only financial resources, but that's also, additional headcount of staff, facilities to house staff. And we also rely for implementation on different contracts. So contract capacity can be an issue too. So this plan will address some of those constraints and, suggest ways that we may be able to overcome them. Now, I just wanted to sort of illustrate some of these items, both things that the council is specifically calling for, and then also remind you of some other things, other obligations, other things that DOT does in addition to this. So as we move forward, we'll have to figure out how to ramp up some of these particular items, but also balance that with the need to continue to provide other services and other programs. So bus lanes are something we've been continuing to implement throughout the city. Here's a bus lane extension on Highland Boulevard that was implemented late last year in 2020. We also look to improve bus stops. In this case, and there are several locations in Staten Island where we don't have fully accessible sidewalks to bus stops. So we make improvements to there where we can, and we have the resources to do so, in addition to benches and shelters and real-time bus information where we can. Protected bike lanes is obviously we've been working on bike lanes for many years. Protected bike lanes have become more of a priority for us in recent years. And that means either, having a line of cars, as you see here, protect the bike lane with a buffer, or in some cases, we can use physical protection like concrete barriers for that purpose. And then the pedestrian island, Sorry, this is a little offset, but I think you can see there's a pedestrian island, and basically that's one of the ways that we add additional pedestrian space, mostly for safety reasons. We can do that. We can also look to expand or extend sidewalks in key locations, but generally it's to create a shorter crossing distance for safety purposes. And then some accessibility items. I mentioned the pedestrian ramp upgrades before. That's really something we have a pretty robust program of going throughout the city, and wherever pedestrian ramps are either missing altogether or they don't meet ADA standards, which has to do with the slope and the installation of those tactile red pads that you see there. Wherever, we're doing a lot of that already, as well as implementing these accessible pedestrian signals for the for the visually impaired. And then commercial loading zones is something we also evaluate in areas where demand meets it. We look to install those as well. Now I want to talk about some of the other things that we do that aren't in the plan, but we'll have to continue. We're obviously committed to continue to doing. Roadway resurfacing, obviously that's a big part of what we do in terms of maintenance. And then our bridges throughout the city also require significant maintenance. Traffic calming, there are some things we do beyond what was called for specifically in the plan to try to encourage or promote pedestrian safety. In this case, slowing down turns by putting in those raised plastic bollards. Obviously safety, vision zero is a big part of what our focus is. And then, this is an exhaustive list, but we maintain all the street lights throughout the city. In recent years, we've been replacing street lights with more efficient LED street lights that, are more energy efficient and green. And then in 2020, there were a series of new programs just sort of as a response to COVID. The city instituted a number of kind of open programs. So we have our open streets programs where we make streets available for pedestrians, cyclists in key locations where we have community support. And then the open restaurant, I'm sure you're all familiar with, is a way of really helping restaurants to sort of make it through the pandemic and still be able to serve customers. And that's a program that we're looking to make permanent. It's something that's been very well received. So those are just some examples of what we do. And I think the point we're trying to make is we do a lot. The council is asking us to do more. We're looking at doing that, but we have to also balance it with things that aren't specifically in that bill that were either developed after that bill passed, or just basic nuts and bolts things that we need to continue to do, like keeping our streets paved and our bridges safe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin to talk specifically about what our approach is to this plan.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. All right, so thinking about the plan, as Chris sort of mentioned, can you go to the next slide, Chris? Okay. Thank you. So thinking about the law and as it was passed, we see the New York City Streets Plan as really fitting in as sort of a connector between a lot of the existing planning work that we've done or that exists in the city. So while we have one at NYC, which is our citywide plan, and DOT in 2016 created sort of a strategic plan, but I think it encompasses a lot of the additional work that Chris brought up, including like road repair, talked about our internal staffing. The streets plan kind of brings together a lot of the sort of modal planning work we've been doing into a comprehensive plan that would sort of cover the entire agency and the entire city and sort of multiple modes of travel, but wouldn't necessarily replace the strategic plan. We see it as a complementary plan moving forward to that document. And so go to the next slide. And so as Chris mentioned, like this plan was passed originally in 2019, and as we were ramping up to sort of get get going on the planning development, like getting the work together, we were kind of hit, as the city was hit really hard by COVID. And so we see this as an opportunity to not only think about, what the plan like talked about, what the law talks about, which is the longer term items, but thinking about, how are we responding to some of the shorter term changes that we've seen and what may be some potential differences in the city, like post-COVID, that we will be planning when that the law didn't necessarily take into account. And so that definitely includes a renewed focus on thinking about equity and how our programs and our work has been distributed across the city and how we can use the work to be sort of responsive to that. And then also think about the additional budget implications that come with some of the changes that are associated with COVID. And so this could, as could have impact. We need funding to kind of support the projects that the plan is coming up with, but we also need headcount, and we also need to get a number of other things that are associated with the work that we do in terms of facilities. And so I think we're just thinking about, what will be, as we're going through this planning process, what will be sort of the implication of the uncertainty around like the long-term budget and the changes in the budget that we have. So we were lucky to be able to get some help from some external consultants as we do this planning work. Sam Schwartz, a name that you all are probably pretty familiar with, is the main primary contractor or primary consultant on our contract, and they have a number of sub-consultants who are working with them, who work with the city and other agencies and worked around New York in different capacities. I just want to highlight the public works partners will be leading the engagement work, and then the next slide we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what all that will entail. So for our engagement, I think we believe that it's really important to not only provide information to the public about the work we do, some of the information we share with you today, but also the work of the plan and understanding like what the planning process looks like. But we also want to use that as an opportunity to make sure we're getting valuable input to inform the plan work. And because this is a repeated plan, a continual plan that we'll be doing for a number of years after, we think it can also inform future plans and sort of the future work that we do at the department. And so we are definitely seeking to get a broad representation, including like all kind of communities across New York. This is a citywide plan. And so we think we should have representation from all corners of the city. And we're focused on really trying to gather public opinion about sort of broad public issues, broad transportation issues. So things like, and we'll talk a little bit further about it on the next couple of slides, but things about, how should funding be allocated? How should we be driving our decisions in terms of goals? And not as focused on individual like projects on the street, but there will be opportunities for all feedback to kind of be gained. And of course, like we're going to be taking that in and making sure we're like documenting it and doing the proper responses. Move to the next slide. So for our public engagement, we have this high level timeline. We're starting right now with these presentations to the borough boards, and we'll be providing community board notification to the borough boards that we are not able to get in front of this month. So we have you guys up today, and we have Brooklyn next week. We also we're working really hard on an online engagement platform called MetroQuest that we'll be using to gather information from the public. And once we have that, we will definitely be sharing that with you all to try to gather as much public opinion as we can. And then in addition, we know from past efforts that sometimes there are self-selected engagement mechanisms, such as the engagement platform or public meetings, don't necessarily gather input from all parts of the city. And so we're going to be doing a lot of monitoring on where we're getting information from, who's participating, and if we find that we're not getting information from like certain communities or certain parts of the city, then we're going to be doing more targeted polling that includes sort of random phone calls or either random emails or text messages to those groups to make sure we get some input from them. And then starting in June and July, we'll have a first round of public workshops. And then in September and October, we'll have another round. The first round will be more focused on our gathering information, and the second round will be more focused on sort of getting feedback on some of the plan recommendations that we come up with. And as Chris noted, the plan is due to the council in December. And throughout, we'll be working with the electeds, giving briefings, and then also doing more board presentations and speaking with the advocacy community. So for the engagement platform, as I mentioned, we're using MetroQuest, and the idea is that this will be linked on a DOT webpage. This is a platform that is well researched and has been used by a number of other transportation agencies, and it has a really high a response ratio that we selected and thought was was a good platform to use. We're going to be asking for people to give opinions initially about just like the project goals that we have set up. Talk about allocating budget to different either transportation projects we can do or different items in the roadway. And then also there'll be an opportunity to sort of provide preference about street typologies and definitely to give us feedback, on sort of what community they're coming from and what community they're representing. Our public works partners is putting together a strategy to make sure we're using all the resources that are available to us. So working with other city agencies, working through social media, making sure we're getting the word out. And then for the targeted opinion polls, this is something that we have used on a project in the past, but the idea is that we want to make sure that our engagement is representative of all in the city. So we're going to be reaching out to places where we're seeing that we're not getting feedback that we were expecting. This will be done by a professional firm who's going to be working with public works partners. And again, we have experience in this in the Bronx bus priority studies, and we had a good experience in terms of getting a representative sample of the community that we were looking for. And just lastly, just talk a little bit more about what we're planning for the workshops. There will be virtual. They will be starting in June and July, and the idea is we'll probably use a platform like Zoom or something similar that will allow sort of groups to come together. They will be divided up by borough. We haven't decided exactly which community boards will go to each one, but the idea is that we'll build upon the information that we're getting from the engagement platform, and that we will hopefully get some really good input at this first round for the plan. And then the second one will be coming with the more finalized recommendation of the work that we are going to be putting in a plan, and we'll duplicate the same breakup by borough and how we end up breaking up the community boards, and then it'll be an avenue for feedback. And that is all that we have today. So we're happy to take any additional questions or any questions that you guys have. And thank you very much again for having me.
Great, Chris and Justin, thank you so very much. Can I contact one of you for a copy of the slide deck to put in with the minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Very good, thank you.
And Brooke, can we get a copy of that when you get it?
Yes, I'll have it in the minutes for you.
Thank you.
And to that end, any questions?
Well, I have two. The first one I have is, what is the basis of your streetscape? I see the pictures of broad, wide streets putting all of these activities on, but Staten Island doesn't have streets except for Richmond Avenue and Highland Boulevard that resemble anything like that. Number one, so how are you going to fit this broad citywide plan onto our streets? And number two, I find it very ironic you're talking about equity where you will not allow bus shelters in our minority communities because the sidewalks are too narrow for the generic bus shelter that you have. And that's kind of what worries me. You use a centralized plan without accommodating the borough's needs and realities. And, it looks to me like you're going to try and just put us into a shoe that's 2 sizes too small for us once again. And, I do laugh at your, comment about equity when most of the communities of color on Staten Island are not able to avail themselves of bus shelters because you're not being equitable with the design of your shelters.
I can address both things. So I think you raise a very good point, which is that, we can't take an one size fits all approach to this. So yes, there are sort of citywide targets to do certain things, but I think we're committed to thinking about different parts of the city in different ways. So, there may be a target where, citywide we have to implement X number of lanes of a certain type of, say bike lanes or bus lanes. We're not just going to say, okay, like every borough or every, community board should get an equal amount of that necessarily. I think we want to move towards thinking carefully about the appropriate type of the appropriate type of treatments for different types of communities. So I think we can work on achieving those overall city goals without necessarily just taking a one size fits all approach to everything. And then in terms of the question about the bus shelters, yes, I hear what you're saying. We've been, our bus shelter contract has been somewhat limiting in terms of what we can do. We're at a point now where it's very difficult to locate a bus shelter at all, let alone one on a narrow sidewalk. So, that may be something that we need to look at as part of this plan.
Can I add to
Thank
that?
you.
This
Thank
is
you.
Charlene Wagner from Community Board 3. To echo on what Joe said about being equitable, we have bus stops on the South Shore that don't have sidewalks, and they have been declined several times for sidewalks for various reasons. We also have no shelters on a lot of our bus stops for commuters. And again, they've been requested, but for one reason or another, they've been declined. So I echo Joe's sentiment about being equitable. It's not equitable across every borough. We do with that. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you, Charlene. Any other questions?
I don't have a question. I have a recommendation.
Chris, we'll get right back to you. Jerry?
On Richmond Avenue by the Staten Island Mall, you've created a bus lane in the middle of the street. You have bus lanes all over. I recommend you put up signage or directions or information or something to drivers on how to navigate Richmond Avenue by the Staten Island Mall, because you've created a bus lane in 2 different areas, and cars are going in and out, exiting the mall, entering the mall, going in the bus lane to make turns. I think you need more than just having on the cement street bus lane. I think you need signs up with arrows and something to really.
I can address that. Yeah, I can address that. There was a new bus lane that we had just installed. We completed, DDC, who was in charge of the contractor, just completed over on Saturday installing some red paint on the bus lane over there, and we are planning on putting up additional signs.
Good.
So they had not gotten to the step of the red paint yet, so it was a little bit confusing. The red paint's been completed. I believe Saturday they completed it, and as I said, we're looking at putting up more signage. So yeah, we're addressing that. But thanks for bringing that up.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Sure, that's true. Thank you.
Chris?
I guess a comment in that, we're living during a time where, as they say, a pandemic is a terrible thing to waste, in that if this is a time for us to reimagine, to rethink how we do whatever it is we do, let's use this time well, in that regard. So that being said, those of us that have been in city government for, more than a minute and a half have gone to more than their share of, visionings and bringing out public engagement. And it's just a general comment that I think that the agency, whichever agency it might be, is well served if it's able to be clear with the participants that what the limitations are. Too many times we've seen folks collecting information that we know is absolutely not possible. I don't always mean just because resources aren't there in terms of budget, but to Joe and Charlene's point, the topography might be such that it really can't allow something to happen. So I would just ask that when visionings are done, if our agencies in place can be not squelching idea, and imagination, but be able to hear it and curtail it in such a way that we let folks know what actually is possible and what the limitations would be in fulfilling that particular idea. So it's just a very general observation about visionings and community engagements that sometimes can leave people disappointed at the tail end.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions? Comments, concerns? All right. Well, DOT, thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate your time.
Thank you again for having us. We appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Presentation.
Bye.
Bye now. All right. Most of our Borough Board friends. Any correspondence that we may have? Any old business? You know what's coming next. Any new business? I do believe there's a presentation in the works for next month, but I don't have information on that yet, but we'll have an agenda out as soon as we do. That being said, anything else, concerns or questions from any of you before we close? All right. Well, that was speedy. Thank you all for being very gentle with me. Could I entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion
Jerry?
to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And sorry, that was you, Bob?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
You are so cute. Well, very
I
good.
said it first, Brooke. I said it first a long time ago, but nobody listened to me.
It's not personal. I can't see your face, man.
I know. I'm doing homework. I'm doing homework with my son.
Good.
Can't worry about DOT's master plan.
Indeed.
We're going to get screwed up here.
Use red paint, Nick.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. Have a wonderful balance of your Cinco de Mayo.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Brooke, take care, everybody. Be safe.
Bye now.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank
Bye-bye.